Good evening and welcome. Thank you all for joining me tonight for this telephone town hall discussion. I'm looking for the opportunity to hear directly from you about the issues you're concerned about and talk about how I'm fighting in Congress to stand up for our community. First, I just want to note, if you catch me at Wegmans, if you catch me in the airport, or even at the dry cleaners, I'm happy to have a discussion about a whole host of topics, including politics and the current political climate. Tonight's conversation, however, is in my official capacity and will focus on congressional business. Um, about a month ago, when the new administration began, I was optimistic and voiced my optimism that perhaps we could find a way to come together in a bipartisan way, as I've done throughout my career, to find common ground on important issues, things like lowering costs, building an economy that works for everyone, and protecting our neighborhoods. Unfortunately, the past month has made clear the president has little or no desire to work collaboratively. He has thrown our country into chaos, violating the Constitution, our body of law, and the very norms of decency that have always defined American leadership. He has prioritized tax breaks for the wealthiest 1% of Americans over the needs of working families. I'm deeply concerned. I'm frustrated. I'm angry, as I'm sure many of you are as well. And that's why I wanted to hold this session today. I want to hear from you, share a little bit about what I'm doing in Congress, and talk about the road ahead. I know it can be easy to feel angry or discouraged during moments like these, but now more than ever, we need to come together, raise our voices, and take an active role in our democracy. I remind folks always that despite what people think, the highest title in American governance is not president, is not secretary, is not even a member of Congress. It's citizen. Being a citizen in the United States carries certain freedoms and certain responsibilities. And especially now, we have a responsibility to stay engaged and speak up on the issues that matter most to us. It won't be easy. The struggle ahead will take persistence, determination, all of us standing together. But I do want you to know that I'm in this fight with you every step of the way. In Congress, I'm working to combat the president's harmful actions in a number of ways. I'm sure a number of which we'll touch on in tonight's discussion. Um, Through litigation, as a member of the House Democrats' Rapid Response and Litigation Task Force, through legislative efforts with my colleagues, and through oversight, utilizing my role as a member of two standing committees, one of which is the House Appropriations Committee, where I will get the opportunity to question administration officials under oath and hold them accountable. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to our moderator for the evening, Dirk, who will walk us through the format and logistics for tonight's town hall so we can get to the most important part of this, which is your questions. So with that, Dirk, take it away.
Thank you very much, Congressman. And as I mentioned from the start of the call, if you've got a question that you would like to ask, please press *3 on your telephone keypad. That'll take you into the question queue, and it's a way to get in and ask your question live. And don't forget, the Congressman and his staff put out a very informative e-newsletter. During this event, you can also get signed up to receive that by pressing *6 on your telephone keypad. And I'm seeing here that our first question this evening, Congressman, comes from Alice in Rush, who's asking, what are you doing to fight and protect us from this horrible new regime and the damage they're doing to Americans?
Alice, it's a great question, and it's one I get many times a day. So both I and my colleagues are working hard on a number of fronts. I'll just go through a number of them pretty quickly. I mentioned at the outset a rapid response and litigation task force, which Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries has put together. Members of Congress are barred from bringing litigation against the federal administration. We lack standing under court precedent that dates back 2 centuries plus. But that doesn't stop us from being engaged in working with outside groups. We're working actively. I think there are now probably over 70 lawsuits. I'm sure that number will grow daily as executive orders violate the Constitution or violate federal law, or we believe them to. So what we've done is we coordinate with those outside groups. In many cases, we're talking to lawyers around the country who have offered to work pro bono on behalf of organizations and on behalf of Americans. And I think we're doing reasonably well in this space. There have been a couple of cases where I think you've had really sympathetic judges, but they determined that the person bringing the suit doesn't have standing, but that doesn't mean we won't find people who are harmed that have standing. So that's certainly one way. We're sponsoring legislation to make sure that the worst instincts of the new administration are stopped, and that includes making sure that there's privacy protections and that they're safeguarded, making sure we safeguard critical programs like Medicare, like Social Security, like Medicaid and SNAP. So we're continuing to push against the administration when they intend to do things like impound funds illegally to hurt these programs. I've taken it upon myself with either by myself or with colleagues to write to a number of agencies demanding a briefing from ICE around immigration enforcement efforts that have begun, writing to NASA on probationary firings, contacting Health and Human Services about dramatic cuts to NHI funding, a letter that I sent, which I was able to get actually bipartisan support for. So we're pushing on that. We're working with colleagues where we can on the other side of the aisle, who I think are quietly, unfortunately too quietly, frustrated with many of the actions here. And I wrote a letter to the president yesterday because a number of the agencies, which are federal agencies, were set up by Congress with the specific intent that they be independent of the White House and the president. So things like the Federal Elections Commission, or something called the Elections Advisory Commission, which gives advice and counsel on these issues, or the Federal Elections Commission, which actually reviews complaints, including complaints that have been brought recently against the Trump administration for its campaign this past year. The president has removed the chair of that commission, I believe illegally, and have written to ask him to rescind it. Now, I don't have any illusion that the president's going to do that, but we're going to continue to push back with everything that we have. It's also holding events like this, getting input from people, and meeting, as I did last week when I was back in Rochester for the whole week, with dozens of groups to talk to them about what they're experiencing on the ground and how we can use that data when we're doing advisory and committee hearings. So when we're doing the House Appropriations Committee I mentioned, we get requests from each of the department heads. So the Attorney General of the United States, the FBI had the Director of Administrator of Drug Enforcement Agency. They'll all come to the Appropriations Committee for funds to run their departments. When they do, and they're under oath, subject to perjury, if they lie or mislead the Congress, we'll have opportunities to ask them that. The other thing that I've done most recently is set up an advisory group back home, so that made up of human service providers, healthcare providers, educators who are potentially impacted by the actions of the administration, to continue to apprise me on what they're seeing on the ground. So that's a number of things, and meeting with groups to encourage them, if they have strong opinions about this, and many do, to continue to voice those opinions to me and to my colleagues in the region who represent the area, so they can hear from us.
Thank you very much, Congressman Morelle. It's great to see so many folks are connected in on this call, over a few thousand folks at this moment. A quick reminder, if you've got a question you'd like to ask, please press *3 on your telephone keypad. And Congressman, our next question comes from Robert in Brighton, asking, what is the most effective action a local Rochester citizen can take right at this moment?
Yeah, it's thank you, Robert. Again, a lot of folks have asked me that question as well, because their sense of frustration and anger. I tell them there's a number of things you can do. Certainly, as it relates to just offering your opinion on how you feel about these things to my office, to me, but also to others who represent the region. Now, I represent Monroe County, and I'm the only representative from Monroe County and in Ontario County, East Bloomfield, and Victor. But there are other members. Claudia Tenney represents many people in the region. Nick Langworthy, another colleague who represents the Southern Tier. to be able to reach out to them. In fact, I tell many of the uh, human service agencies that provide services, many of them aren't limited just to Monroe County, but to make sure that they express themselves. There are many ways where members of Congress have the ability to stop the worst instincts of the administration. So certainly reaching out, talking to people, expressing your opinion, honestly, talking to friends that you have or relatives in other parts of the country, other communities, so that you can let them know what your views are and really to try to persuade them. I see so much misinformation, disinformation, malinformation coming from the White House. With all due respect, the president often lives in an alternate reality, and many people who support him just take, on faith, blind faith, what the president says. But many times he's frankly wrong, wrong factually, wrong historically, wrong contextually in terms of what his job is. So we have to keep pushing back. There are other ways as well. Obviously, exercise your rights as a citizen and as someone who votes. And by the way, this is a great reminder. We say it all the time, those of us who, are in government, but elections have consequences. And I think many people, many who may have voted for the president, I think felt many of the things that he said during the campaign, that he says in this administration, that he's kidding about it. But I'll give him credit for one thing. He says the quiet part out loud. He tells people what he's going to do. People may choose not to believe him because it breaks the norms of decency and what we come to expect from an American president. And that means, and that's not restricted to Democrats by any means. Republican presidents, presidents of different parties for years have established certain norms that they abide by and precedents, and President Trump does not. So I think altogether we need to continue to raise our voices and to push back and to talk to friends and family in a way that is not confrontational, but hopefully is informative to them about many of the things that we're seeing.
So, for everybody on the line with us, I'd like to take a moment and have you answer a poll question. The technology that we're using for this live event allows us to get your feedback, and it's very important to us. So, I've got a question. I'll read the question twice as well as the answers that are available to you. And please, just again, use your telephone keypad to reply to this poll question. Are you concerned about Republicans' plans to cut benefits like Medicare and Social Security to pay for tax cuts for the wealthy? Please press 1 for yes, press 2 for no. So again, are you concerned about Republicans' plans to cut benefits like Medicare and Social Security to pay for tax cuts for the wealthy? Please press 1 for yes, press 2 for no. See, a number of people are responding. Thank you very much for participating. And another quick reminder, get subscribed to the Congressman's e-newsletter during this call by pressing *6 on your telephone keypad. And let's get to the phones right now. We're heading out to Rochester. We've got Linda on the line with us. Linda, you are live with Congressman Morelle. What's on your mind? Hello, Linda.
Yes.
You are live. Go ahead, please.
Oh, I'm wondering how you're going to be protecting Social Security, Medicare, and VA benefits. My husband and I are both disabled, and those are our only sources of income.
Thanks, Linda. It's a really important question. And we saw just a few weeks ago that the president in the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, issued a memorandum which would have cut dramatically a lot of programs that people rely on. Social Security was not one of them. That's a mandatory program. You can change the laws, certainly, and I'll get to that in a minute. But we pushed back against that. And not only did the court step in, but there was such an outcry that there was a freezing of the memo or a rescission of the memo. We'll see how long it goes. We're not even certain entirely that the administration is abiding by that court order. But look, there are a number of things that have to happen. First, we want to hear from people uh, when benefits aren't arriving as they're supposed to. So if they're scheduled to arrive, if you're expecting to get a check for whatever reason it doesn't, we need to hear because there's not a whole lot of transparency coming out of the administration. The president believes transparency is him holding press conferences or talking to the press. But when you're not providing information, when the information is wrong, that's not transparency. Um, and so, really hearing from people on what they're experiencing is really important to us. But look, there are a number of things that are going to happen over the next month or two. I don't want to get into so much detail because it may not be helpful to you. But we're in the middle of uh, an appropriations process, which is really just coming up with the money that funds our government. So veterans benefits are included in that. Medicaid is included in some of that. Medicare and Social Security could be affected if there's a change in law, but it would require a change in law, and we're really pushing back against our colleagues in the House who want to make cuts to some of these benefits. Look, this is uh, a obviously a potential disaster for people, many of whom are in the same situation you find yourself in, Linda. Look, Medicaid benefits, which are being talked about openly, involve senior citizens, citizens who are disabled. They're the real big users of Medicaid. If you're in a skilled nursing facility, oftentimes people end up on Medicaid. Withdrawing or lessening benefits means you're going to pay providers less. So, nursing homes will have difficulty keeping staff levels at what they're at. And lowering them makes it just more challenging for patients and it affects patient safety. So those are things we're going to be arguing about. We're going to be pushing back and forth. And the thing that's really interesting, I'm going to just as an aside here, the theory here in Washington by many of people in the administration is that we can somehow cut $2 trillion out of services that are provided to Americans. Medicaid benefits are one of the biggest being talked about. And even if you thought that it were possible to do that and not seriously harm Americans, something I wouldn't suggest could happen, but let's just put that aside and say we can cut inefficiencies in government, we can cut programs and save $2 trillion. It would be interesting to have that argument if the benefits of that savings went back to lower taxes for everyday Americans, but it doesn't. So this is the plan that was passed in part last night. The first vote on this, the final votes are probably weeks and weeks away. Um, but the idea is to cut $2 trillion of services, and instead of giving that to working families in the middle class, it is to give a $4.5 trillion tax cut to the wealthiest Americans. 83% of the last Trump tax bill, 83% of the benefit went to the top 1% of Americans. So you're essentially trying to create savings and trying to cut programs so you can give money to the wealthiest Americans. And oh, by the way, it's not even sufficient for the amount of money you want to give to them. You have to borrow by their own account as much as $1.6 trillion that you're going to borrow, which is only going to add dramatically to the national debt. So that's the theory of change that my friends on the other side of the aisle are talking about right now. And those cuts will have enormous impacts on people. So, Linda, we're going to keep fighting against cuts to the VA. I was at the Veterans Administration in Canandaigua just on Friday to meet with the administrators. We're going to certainly push back against cuts to services for our seniors, for our veterans, for our disabled community. And we're also going to try to ensure that if there's going to be tax cuts in America, that they're going to go to the working class, working families, to the middle class, because that's where the benefits ought to be, not to the wealthiest of Americans. So thanks for the question.
And our next question comes from Diane in Penfield. Diane, you are live with the Congressman. Go ahead, please.
Hello, Congressman. My concerns are with future elections. I'm troubled by this SAVE Act. I'm troubled by the possibility of Trump taking over the USPS. I'm also very troubled by all the disinformation that is pretty much filtered through social media left and right. Can you address those things, and what can we do to protect our elections, because they are critically important, especially now?
Yeah. Thanks so much for the question, Diane. One of my responsibilities in Congress is I'm the lead Democrat, the top Democrat on something called the Committee on House Administration, which, as the name implies, is charged with uh, keeping everyone here in Congress operating in the House and its security, et cetera. But one of our other responsibilities is federal election law. And the SAVE Act, which you referred to, and I'll just give a brief description for people who may not be familiar with it. It's a proposal which makes it dramatically more difficult for any American to register to vote. Um, this was done under the pretext of stopping non-citizens from voting in federal elections. The truth is, there's almost never cases cited that turn out to be true where a non-citizen has voted in a federal election. First of all, it's against the law even to register to vote in a federal election if you're not a U.S. citizen, and it's a felony and cause for deportation if you attempted to vote in a federal election as a non-U.S. citizen. And it simply doesn't happen. We held over 10 hearings on elections in the last 2 years. Not once was there any evidence that this happened. So I frankly was always concerned that the president intended to use this if he didn't win the election as the pretext for challenging the election. So the SAVE Act does a number of things in order to supposedly stop this activity, which doesn't happen, from happening. As I say, it's a solution in search of a problem. But it does do this. It makes it incredibly difficult to register to vote. So, for instance, you have to prove citizenship, which means there will be no more, and you have to do it in person at the local board of elections. So the days where you'd set up at colleges voter registration drives or at county fairs voter registration drives, those would be gone if the SAFE Act became law, because you'd have to register in person. You have to bring proof of citizenship. You have to prove that that you were born in the United States by bringing a birth certificate when you register to vote. If you are a woman who changed her name by virtue of marriage, your birth certificate and your driver's license may not match. You're going to have to bring additional proof of marriage, so your marriage certificate or marriage license. You may bring a passport, but half of Americans don't have passports. So, and this doesn't just affect people who have never registered. If you move and have to re-register, you have to do this. If you're active military personnel somewhere in the world and want to register to vote, you essentially cannot, because there's no way you'd be able to get leave to come home to register at your local registration office. So this is going to dramatically change the way that Americans register to vote. I think it's intended, frankly, to keep students away from voting for whatever reason, because many students, I remember when I went off to college, I was lucky. I remember to bring my jeans and some paper with me. I dare say I wouldn't have had my birth certificate. It certainly wouldn't have been on my short list. So this is an effort really to stop people from voting. I think the bill will potentially come up in the House in the next week or so. I will be on the floor debating against it. I will lead the Democratic debate against it. So we're very concerned. My hope is that it never passes, because if it does, Democrats and Republicans will be very, very angry with the outcome. You mentioned CISA, which is does cybersecurity. One of the things that we've worked very hard at over the last several years has been to stop the intrusion of foreign powers interfering in our elections. And we have seen over the last several presidential and congressional elections where foreign actors, Iran, North Korea, China, Russia, have intended to interfere in our elections. And we have worked very hard with CISA, which is the federal agency charged with cybersecurity, to make sure that we continue that effort. The Trump administration has just fired all the employees and closed up the unit, which is going to make our efforts to keep foreign interference out of American elections going to make it near impossible. So very, very troubling. I've written to the president about that. We've continued to push on that. We're going to ask when those individuals come for appropriations funding about it. We're going to do everything we can to reinstate that. That isn't a Democratic or Republican initiative. That should trouble every American who's concerned about the impact of cybersecurity attacks on our election system.
It is great to see so many people have connected into this live telephone town hall with Congressman Morelle answering your questions. If you've got a question you'd like to ask, please press *3 on your telephone keypad. And don't forget the Congressman's e-newsletter. You can receive that by pressing *6 on your telephone keypad. Heading back out to Rochester, we've got Dorian on the line with us now. Dorian, you're live with the Congressman. Go ahead. Hello, Dorian.
Yes, I'm here.
You are live on the call. Please go ahead with your question.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I was just asking what the federal cuts that have been made for folks who have jobs in the federal government, is that going to affect, and how will that affect folks as far as a lot of like permit processes, or things that the federal government does for each city and town and state?
Yeah, Dorian, it's a great question. Look, I think and I believe that there are certainly ways to drive efficiencies in government. You don't spend trillions of dollars a year, as the federal government in the United States does, without having some things that are less than completely efficient. I think we'd say that about almost any organization we belong to. So that I have no objection to. I think there's a way to do it, and a way to really drive some savings and to make services more accessible for all Americans. But the president's approach has been entirely reckless in my mind. Even Elon Musk's approach has been pretty destructive. I mean, I think if you understand the way he operates, as I understand it, in his private business, is really to sort of smash things apart, and after that, sort of look and figure out how to put it back together. That might work in the electric car business, or it might work in other places. Here, you're dealing with people's real lives, and we do at the federal government many things that safeguard the health and safety of all Americans. The FAA, we've clearly had some high-profile incidents involving air traffic and crashes. Letting go FAA employees, some of whom are tracking and building flight paths for airlines and flights, very, very dangerous. But I certainly don't suggest that that's responsible for the crashes. But at a moment where we're really concerned about air safety, eliminating employees without a idea of what they do or the impact it can have, I think is very dangerous. Same is true of VA employees. And we employ a lot of vets, by the way, in the federal government. It's been a big push over the last several years to have hiring preferences for veterans. Many, many, many are losing their jobs now. We've heard from the American Legion, et cetera. And one of the, I think, glaring mistakes that was made is over 300 employees were let go, many of whom work for the NNSA, which is our nuclear, by the Department of Energy. Many of them worked on NNSA, which is responsible for the stewardship over our national nuclear stockpile. So, this is highly sensitive, highly critical to our national defense. They have tried to rehire many of these people when they realized that they didn't know what they did, but fired them anyway. But because they destroyed and eliminated their emails and addresses, they're having a hard time finding these employees to bring them back. But again, there are ways to do this. I think if you were anyone who bought a business, anyone who becomes the CEO of a not-for-profit organization, anyone who takes charge of an organization, you're going to want to do everything you can to drive efficiencies, maximize your mission, make sure that you have people working in places where they're giving, the optimal service back. But you wouldn't do it this way, and you wouldn't do it in the manner which I often describe as, instead of ready, aim, fire, their approach seems to be ready, fire, and then, maybe let's aim and see if we hit anything. So I think it's really troubling. Hopefully, we'll get a little more thoughtfulness as time goes on.
So at this point in the call, I'd like to ask another poll question, and please use your telephone keypad to respond. Question is, how concerned are you that Trump's recent tariffs will raise prices for you? Very concerned? Press 1. Somewhat concerned? Press 2. Not concerned, press 3. So again, please use your telephone keypad to respond to this question. How concerned are you that Trump's recent tariffs will raise prices for you? Very concerned? Press 1. Somewhat concerned? Press 2. Not concerned? Press 3. See a number of people are keying in responses. Thank you very much for participating. And let's get back to the question. We've got Randy in Victor on the line with us. Hello, Randy. You're live with the Congressman. Go ahead with your question.
Hi, Congressman. I just am asking a question about the Medicaid cuts. I have a daughter with a developmental disability who lives in a group home, and I think probably about 98% of her benefits come through Medicaid. And when I hear that they're going to be potentially slashing Medicaid, I'm very concerned about how that will impact Jamie as well as all the people who have intellectual and developmental disabilities and really rely on those Medicaid benefits and the SNAP as well.
Yeah, thank you, Randy, for the question. I hope the best for Jamie. Yeah, I think I'm not sure people fully appreciate how important Medicaid is to healthcare in this country. About 72 million Americans get their insurance via Medicaid. Probably another 7 or 8 million on the Affordable Care Act exchange programs. And look, Medicaid is typically spends significant amounts of money on senior citizens. I mentioned that often. If you're receiving a care at what we generally refer to as a nursing home, it's called skilled nursing facility, is the highest level of care. Many people in many of the facilities in our region have almost entirely populations made up of Medicaid recipients. And when you cut back, as is being suggested, I mean, the Republicans passed last night, the House majority, a bill which calls for nearly $880 billion in healthcare cuts, almost all of which will be Medicaid, because that's in that committee, that's what they fund. So for senior citizens, it's going to mean cuts to the providers. It doesn't mean that they're going to somehow catch people who are defrauding the system. If that happens, by the way, and we're pretty aggressive about looking at people who defraud Medicaid, but those are providers that do it. I mean, the individual recipients, like Jamie, they don't get any money in the Medicaid system. Their care is paid for and they're provided services. So, and many people who are developmentally or physically disabled rely on Medicaid as their form of health insurance and the provision of health care. This would be so disruptive to the 72 million Americans who rely on it. So I hope that many of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle will come to their senses about this. They're certainly going to hear from folks who have parents or grandparents in nursing homes, who have children like Jamie who rely on it, who are either in group homes or live in the community. So it's a real challenge. I will say last night I was proud. Not a single member of my party voted for this budget resolution, which had nearly $900 billion worth of cuts to healthcare. And it passed by the slimmest of margins. And I say this has become a game of inches. It passed 217 to 215. So that doesn't do anything yet, but it sets the structure and the framework for what I think the president wants to have happen. But I believe there's going to be a lot of conversation. A lot of people are going to be speaking out, as you are, Randy, to stop this. Again, there are things that we can do to create efficiencies, but cutting back on critically needed programs like Medicaid. You mentioned SNAP. For people who don't know what that is, it's supplemental assistance program, supplemental nutrition assistance program, what many people referred to years ago, and the old name for it was food stamps, but people rely on it. Veterans, seniors, people who have disabilities rely on these programs, which is why we got to continue to make them viable for all American families.
Everyone, you can get signed up to receive the Congressman's e-newsletter and stay informed by pressing *6 on your telephone keypad during this live event. So again, get signed up to receive information from the Congressman and his staff via the e-newsletter by pressing star 6 on your telephone keypad. Now we're off to Fairport, and we've got Angela joining us on the line. Hi, Angela. You're live on the
Hello.
call. What are you thinking about?
Question. Good evening, Congressman Morelle. What are the next steps in the budget process, and what actions, if any, can citizens take to influence that process?
Well, thanks, Angela, for the question. It is really confusing. There's a lot of different terms that you'll hear. The basic process for putting together budgets at the federal level is something called the appropriation process, which is kind of a fancy way, dating back to the early days of the Republic, that are spending bills. They simply say how much, and there's 12 different bills that you stitch together to make the budget, and they're broken up by areas of interest. So, for instance, I serve on two subcommittees in the Appropriations Committee. And one of the subcommittees I serve on is Defense. So all of America's defense, Department of Defense, the Department of the various service branches, Army, Navy, et cetera, we fund in the Defense Appropriations Bill. I'm also on another subcommittee called that is Commerce, Justice, and the Science Programs. So as you can understand, commerce programs, but also the FBI, the U.S. attorneys, the Attorney General's Office, Drug Enforcement Agency, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. Those are all in something that's called the CJS bill. So you knit together these 12 appropriation bills, and that really tells you how you're going to fund the government for what are called non-mandatory programs. Already, this is in the weeds. I'm sorry. Mandatory programs are Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. So you don't have to pass an appropriations bill. You can change, though, the program, which is what we're concerned about happening. We are 5 months into our fiscal year, which begins October 1st, but neither House nor Senate has agreed on any appropriations bill for the fiscal year that we're almost halfway through. In fact, we only have authorization to spend federal money through March 14th. Once that happens, if that day comes and goes and we don't have another bill to figure out how to spend, the government will shut down. So that's really troubling. So that goes on, and we'll start the new appropriations process for the October 1, 2025-26 fiscal year pretty soon, but we have to solve the crisis that we face right now. You lay on top of that something called reconciliation, which is not used always, but you can every single fiscal year, you can do a reconciliation bill, which gives instructions to the committees on what kinds of changes should be made over a period of time. So this is really confusing, but what it all boils down to is we're in the middle of a crisis. I don't know that the majorities in either house can pass a spending bill. We'll see. We hope that they will reach out to us and do a bipartisan agreement which safeguards the things that we care about and builds an economy for all that gives needed resources to programs that are vital to Americans, that is interested in lowering costs. Those are the things that ultimately, for all the budget detail and all the literally all the nuance of it, it really comes down to what are we going to put money into that we care about and what values we hold. So that process is ongoing. As I said, everyone on my side of the aisle voted against this resolution last night, which is a framework for a lot of cuts. And I think you asked, what can we do about it? People have to speak up, and whether that's in social media settings, whether it's in traditional or legacy media, whether it's talking to friends, whether it's frankly in organizations and groups that you're a part of, however you use your volunteer time, your time as a citizen to speak out against some of the more draconian cuts that are being proposed.
So our next caller is Judy in Gates. Judy, welcome to the call. What's your question?
Hello. I was wondering, I had the same question as the previous caller, which was about Medicare and Social Security, and being newly retired. I'm all new to this, and this is our income, so it's really troubling to see what's happening. I have another quick
thing, Congressman, and that is about Claudia Tenney. Because you had said you could reach out to Claudia Tenney, but Claudia Tenney, I don't think is really, my opinion, is that she's not very receptive currently to hearing things that are contrary to what President Trump is saying. So I just wondered about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, people may not want to hear certain things. I'm sure there's things that I don't always want to hear, but it's important to hear them for people to pass them along. Um, and I will say, as it relates to Social Security and Medicare, it is important, both of those programs, to remember people pay into them. So when people talk about vast federal programs like Social Security, you've been paying into Social Security since you went to work. Each of us who are workers, that's how our Social Security benefits are determined by the number of years you worked, what income you made. You have paid into this. This is an insurance program. So you paid your premium, so to speak, and those benefits shouldn't be taken away. And I think Social Security is in some trouble financially. I think the fact that when you hit the $175,000 of income, if you make $250,000 or $500,000 a year, you don't pay any more Social Security taxes beyond that $175,000, and that has really crippled the system. We need to go back at high income levels and reinitiate the Social Security tax on those higher incomes. That would really stabilize the system for generations to come. Medicare, similarly, you pay Medicare taxes, so you may not use them. Certainly when you're young, you don't qualify for Medicare until you hit the age of 65. But you're paying into that. You pay Medicare taxes. So again, these are things that Americans have paid for. The notion that they would be taken away, in my mind, is reprehensible. So we're going to keep pushing on them. Are they serious about it? Hard to tell, Judy. They certainly are talking about it, and they passed a budget resolution that makes dramatic cuts to the Medicaid program. So, and as it relates to other legislators, I think you just have to keep contacting them, whether they pay attention to it or not. Obviously, they'll have to answer for that at some point. That's the beauty of American democracy, is at the end of the day, people get to make the decision, and they choose who will represent them.
Well, let's do another poll question. So far, so good. People have been responding. We thank you for that. Your opinion matters. Please use your telephone keypad to give us your response. Question is, what issues are you most concerned about? Healthcare? Press 1. The economy? Press 2. Immigration? Press 3. Education? Press 4. Something other? Press 5. So again, what issues are you most concerned about? Healthcare? Press 1. The economy? Press 2. Immigration? Press 3. Education? Press 4. Something other? Press 5. The replies are being clicked. That's wonderful. Thank you very much for participating. Let's get back to another question. Out to Rochester we go, and we've got Jane joining us. Hi, Jane. You're live with Congressman Morelle. What's your question?
Hi. Well, someone basically asked my question, which was the most effective way that we could be involved in making a difference. And I'm going to just alter it a little bit, make it a two-parter. What is the most effective way to communicate with Congressman Morelle? And a little deeper dive, what are specific concrete things that we can do today to prevent going down what looks to me like a slippery slope towards Nazi Germany? Thank you.
Well, Jane, thanks for the question. A lot of people are, what's on a lot of people's minds, you just articulated. It is interesting, if you just permit me a little bit of a digression, which is I am often in conversation with people where I'll remind them that there is no end to our roles as citizens, nor is there an assumption that democracy is permanent. We've been blessed in this country. While we are imperfect and we have an imperfect history, I like to think throughout the years we've become, in Jefferson's words, moving towards a more perfect union. But we have to, fight for it every single day because there are people who don't believe in it. And one of the stories I've heard told over and over again is at international summits and discussions where um, President Putin or President Xi of China will say openly they don't think democracy survives the 21st century. That this is a strong leader and autocratic world that we live in, and democracy is too open, which makes it open to differences of opinions, um, makes it open to attacks in social media or cyber attacks, and that they just don't believe in it. Well, we do, and I think you do, or else you wouldn't be on this call and you wouldn't be asking about how to be an effective advocate, and I certainly believe in it. So I think we have to continue to speak out, continue to be engaged, even though there are moments, and I think this has set in with certain people a degree of despair, but we can't be despairing on this. I really do believe, and say this often, that there is a difference between optimism and hope. Optimism is sort of blind, a blind belief that things will get better. Hope involves personal agency, and each of us should be dedicated to it. Not everyone's going to run for public office. Not everyone is going to be a federal employee or a public employee. But we, as I said earlier, we're all citizens, and that is so important. So speaking out, contacting people, even if you feel sometimes like it's a drop in an ocean, they do pile. We pay a lot of attention to what people say, whether it's people who see me in the grocery store or whether people contact our office. We keep track of this, and I guarantee every member of Congress, if he or she is doing their job, is paying pretty close attention to what people in their community say. The other thing is, I think people should think about volunteering where they can. A lot of our human service agencies are struggling and they face real challenges, and there are many people in need in this community. So whether it's helping the kids with literacy issues, or it's helping at a food pantry locally, or whatever you choose to do. So speaking out, volunteering, I think that also because you feel better because you're doing something in that regard. And we have to keep talking as Americans. We have to keep pushing back. Um, I have to say, and I said this earlier, but I say all the time, whether it was a Federalist or whether it was a Republican Democrat or whether it was a Whig or modern day Republicans and Democrats, no president has ever essentially turned a blind eye towards the norms of the presidency or cares about the Constitution, as we have seen not only in the first term, but certainly in the second term of the president. So we have to, if we care about this, and I know you all do, care deeply about this, our freedoms all flow from the Constitution. And we have to keep pushing. We have to keep talking to people, even our friends and neighbors who, disagree with us. Be civil. Civil discussion is still such a central part of American life, and it needs to be in the future. So thanks, Jay.
Hello? No, no. Hello?
Hello.
Yes, hi.
Hi.
Is this Congressman Morelle?
It is.
Hi, I'm sorry I didn't hear the introduction.
Yeah, I don't know what happened, but you
Yeah.
broke through. So, yeah.
Okay,
Can I have your
that's
name?
good. I like a breakthrough. Hi, this is Moses, and
Moses.
I am here in
How
East
are you?
Rochester. I'm good with a whole group of concerned moms and citizens. And our question is, we're curious about what collaboration there is going on between county, state, and federal representation for us in New York, and what might we be able to do to leverage as kind of one of the super contributing states to federal funds to protect New York State
citizens in
Yeah.
particular, with the threat of things like Medicaid, Medicare really being at risk?
Yeah, no, it's a great question,
Thank you.
Moses. Thank you. Thank you for joining us, and thank you to you and all the concerned moms. One of the things that we're working with, I mentioned the litigation group that I'm a part of. We are coordinating with a number of state attorneys general who are pushing back on things like the president's efforts to end birthright citizenship, which is guaranteed in the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. There are over 75 lawsuits against 30 different executive actions, and we're coordinating with law enforcement officials and legislators on those things. As it relates to local efforts, one of the things that I'm really gratified by is the relationship I have with the county executive and the mayor of the city of Rochester, as well as many town supervisors and town board members around the community. I've spent a lot of time in the last several weeks communicating. In fact, this morning I began my day with a conference call with both Mayor Evans and the county executive. And I mentioned that I've formed a congressional advisory group, which is comprised of probably about 50 or 60 different leaders in healthcare, in education, in human services to continue to provide me with support. But the first two people I asked to join, and we're very, very happy to do it, was Mayor Evans and County Executive Bellows. So we are coordinating, partly because much of the funding that the state spends comes from the federal government. So it's going to affect potentially state services. It will certainly affect local governments. And so we want to be coordinated. We want to make sure we're all working hand in hand to try to address the greatest concerns people have, to provide coordinated services where we can. It's going to put a lot of pressure on us, but I think by communicating and talking and sharing in much of the way we did during COVID, during the COVID crisis, we stood up a group similar to what I'm standing up as it relates to federal agency cuts. So it turned out to be really a great exercise. Brought people together, helped us coordinate better, helped give us better service delivery. So, there's an old saying that a crisis is a terrible, terrible thing to waste. So we're not going to waste it. We're going to learn more about how we come together in a unified way to provide services and continue to try to help people in need.
And our next question comes from Eleni in Brighton. Hello, Eleni. You're live. Go ahead with your question.
Hi, Representative Morelle, and thank you for speaking with us tonight. What have you been hearing from your Republican colleagues, including regarding DOGE, and what openings or opportunities do you think we have to actually sway Republicans on some of these Trump policies?
It's a great question, Eleni. I know we have this idea, many of us, that when you come to Congress, that you certainly just sort of line up behind leadership and you vote as in a unitary way where everybody votes one way or another. That's not true. And while the Republicans have been, in my view, very, very quiet and largely obedient to the agenda, there are clearly more and more conversations going on where they are raising real concerns about the impact of DOGE. And look, again, had the president had this idea of setting up a commission to look for efficiencies in government, there are plenty of ways to do it. But first and foremost, to go to Congress to make sure that you get legislative authorization to begin this and do it in a thoughtful way. So what's happening, though, is Republican districts have federal employees. They have universities that rely on NIH research grants to advance innovations in healthcare. They're not immune to this, and I think they're starting. Some of it's quiet, I have to say, that some of them will say things privately that they might not say publicly. But I think when you start to see just a handful of them stepping forward and demonstrating some courage, and I pray they will, or at least I hope their constituents give them that courage to speak out, then I think things will change. And I'm hopeful that that day is nearing. I think as we begin to look at the budget framework that they're talking about, when that starts to materialize and you see some of the specifics of what this will do to people, and it will even do to our security around the world, our national security, our defense forces, even USAID. And I don't mean you asked about Doge, so I want to not go too far afield, but many Americans had never heard of USAID. And I know people are very sensitive about spending foreign aid to aid people in other places around the world. But our military uses that support to establish relationships in faraway places. And, even farmers in the United States, last year, farmers provided $2 billion worth of product sales to USAID. So even American farmers were selling products to people in other countries through the USAID portal, and that's not going to happen any longer. So I think that when farmers start complaining and when veterans start complaining and senior citizens start complaining, I think that's when you're going to start to see real tension on this. And it's beginning now, and I think it's going to continue. And we're continuing to honestly try to force our colleagues to face the reality of what they're doing here by speaking out, by publicly gathering in Congress, but also gathering at town halls and town meetings around the country. So I think it's having an impact. I think it's going to continue to have an impact, and I think we'll get to a better place. But it hasn't happened yet, and I'm frustrated by that, as many people are. Before Dirk, I also want to just thank two excellent ASL translators this evening, Alyssa and Montserrat, who are with us live via the video stream on our website page and on my Facebook page. And so grateful to them that we have that service. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Congressman. I'm going to try and sneak in one more question for you, and that honor goes to Sue in Rochester. Sue, you are live with your congressman. What's your question?
I'm Sue from Irondequoit. Are you asking me to speak?
Yes, ma'am. Please go right ahead with your question.
Hi there. Hi, Congressman Morelle. I like to hear the calm, measured way that you're speaking, but frankly, I don't often feel the same kind of calm reaction to what's going on. And I'm especially glad for all the legal maneuvers, but they're slow and they don't have to be obeyed by the president. And I'm wondering what other measures beyond that you recommend, including any nonviolent civil disobedience. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Sue. I will admit to a fair number of conversations that we're having here about what happens should the White House make a determination that they're not going to abide by court orders. It would be unprecedented in American history. The notion of judicial review of laws to make sure that they are aligned with the Constitution goes back to Marbury versus Madison in the earliest days of this republic, when Justice Marshall determined that they were going to do judicial review. So, and presidents, again, of all political persuasions have abided by court orders. So there is concern that the White House might abandon that practice. There are, however, and while the president has immunity under what I think was a terrible decision by the Supreme Court last year to give immunity to the president for all official acts, which is far beyond what the founders would have ever agreed to. They had just come out of a war with a king and a monarch who had deprived us of our rights. I think it's hard to imagine they would have been okay with this. But while the president may have immunity, members of his government do not. And so if members carry out activities contrary to court decisions and court orders, they face potential real challenges by judges. So if you fail to abide by court orders, there are sanctions that include civil penalties and even under extreme circumstances, criminal penalties. So it's one thing for the president to say it. It's a whole other thing for people to carry out those wishes. And it puts them in a terrible position. There's no question. But if you do something that you know is contrary to a court order, you're going to have, there are consequences for those actions. So we're going to continue to push for that to happen. And look, I appreciate your remark about calmness. There are many moments where I don't feel calm. But our responsibility is to try to be as thoughtful as we move ahead as we can. And my friend Hakeem Jeffries, who's the Democratic leader in the House, who's been a friend for many years, we served in the state legislature together, but he has often commented to me that he thinks calmness is a choice. It's a choice we make, and to be thoughtful and to really make sure that we're, focusing our energies on the things that really are important to Americans. And so we're trying to do that, trying to be thoughtful about this. But people should not mistake calmness or thoughtfulness for lack of energy or commitment to the values that we all share. So thanks for that, and I'm going to continue to make sure that that's the case. And so thanks for that. And I want to thank everyone for listening in. You had incredibly thoughtful questions. Appreciate you being a part of this conversation, this discussion. I love the opportunity to hear from you directly about the challenges you're facing or the concerns that you have about the future and how we can all work together to uphold transparency, accountability for every American, even the president, and to make sure that we have progress that meets our values as Americans. So I'm going to continue along with my team to monitor these issues literally each hour of every day, and to make sure that we continue to update you on the work that we're doing in Washington and back home in Rochester. So we'll be holding more engagement sessions in the days and weeks ahead, whether it's in person and things that I'm doing back home, meeting with groups and meeting with folks who are affected, or perhaps in venues like this. So please stay tuned for more information. In the meantime, if you like to stay in touch, you have a question or a concern, please visit my website at morelle.house.gov, morelle.house, as in House of Representatives, .gov, G-O-V as in Victor. And please stay in touch. I'm really appreciative of this and grateful for all of your work and your support. Thanks again. Dirk, I'm going to hand it over to you. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Have a great night. Back to you, Dirk.
Thank you very much, Congressman. And thank you to everybody for joining today's telephone town hall with Congressman Joe Morelle. If you'd like to stay up to date on the Congressman's work, you can follow him on Facebook at Congressman Joe Morelle, on X at Rep. Joe Morelle. And if you'd like to subscribe to his e-newsletter here at the end of this call, simply stay on the line and leave your name and email address after the tone. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us for this event. We hope you have a great night.